It was a cold, misty evening in late autumn when the story of the ghost passenger began to circulate in the small town of Eldermore. The town, nestled between dense forests and rolling hills, was known for its quiet charm and old-world feel. But beneath its picturesque surface lay a history of strange occurrences and whispered tales. Among them, none was as chilling or as enduring as the story of the ghost passenger who never left. The legend began decades ago, on a night much like this one. The Eldermore train station, a modest structure with a single platform, was bustling with activity. The 9:45 train to the city was always the busiest, carrying workers, students, and travelers eager to leave the sleepy town behind. That night, however, something unusual happened, something that would haunt the station forever. The train pulled into the station right on time, its whistle piercing the stillness of the night. Among the crowd of passengers boarding was a young woman dressed in a long, flowing coat. She carried a small suitcase and wore a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over her face. Witnesses later described her as elegant but distant, as though she didn't quite belong. The conductor, a seasoned man named Harold, greeted her as she handed him her ticket. He noticed her hands were ice-cold, but he thought little of it. After all, the night was chilly and the station was drafty. She took a seat near the window in the last carriage, her gaze fixed on the darkness outside. As the train began its journey, Harold made his rounds, checking tickets and chatting with the regular passengers. When he reached the last carriage, he found it empty. Confused, he searched the entire train, but the young woman was nowhere to be found. Her suitcase, however, remained on the seat where she had been sitting. Harold reported the incident to the station master upon his return, but no one could explain what had happened. The ticket she had handed him was real, but it bore no name, only the date and destination. The suitcase, when opened, contained nothing but a single, faded photograph of the woman standing in front of the Eldermore station. For weeks, the story of the vanishing passenger spread through Eldermore. Some dismissed it as a prank or a misunderstanding, but others were convinced it was something more sinister. Then, one foggy night, the ghost passenger was seen again. A young couple waiting for the 9:45 train claimed they saw a woman in a long coat and wide-brimmed hat standing on the platform. She didn't speak or move, but her presence was unsettling. When the train arrived, she boarded the last carriage and disappeared, just as she had before. Over the years, sightings of the ghost passenger became more frequent. She was always described the same way: elegant, silent, and otherworldly. Some said they felt a sudden chill when she passed by, while others claimed to hear faint whispers in the air. The last carriage of the 9:45 train became known as the ghost car, and many passengers avoided it altogether. As the years went by, the story of the ghost passenger became a part of Eldermore's identity. Locals shared the tale with newcomers, and visitors often came to the station hoping to catch a glimpse of her. Some even claimed to have spoken to her, though their accounts were always vague and contradictory. One man, a retired professor named Arthur, became obsessed with the legend. He spent years researching the history of the station and the surrounding area, hoping to uncover the truth. His investigation led him to an old newspaper article from 1923, which told the story of a young woman named Eleanor Gray. Eleanor had been a resident of Eldermore and was engaged to a man who worked in the city. On the night of their wedding, she was supposed to take the 9:45 train to meet him, but she never arrived. Her body was found days later in the woods near the station, her suitcase lying beside her. The cause of her death was never determined, but many believed she had been murdered. Arthur became convinced that Eleanor was the ghost passenger. He theorized that her spirit was trapped, endlessly repeating the journey she had failed to complete in life. Despite his efforts, however, he could find no way to put her to rest. Even in modern times, the ghost passenger continues to haunt the Eldermore station. Train conductors and passengers alike have reported strange occurrences, from flickering lights to unexplained cold spots. Some have even captured blurry photographs of a figure in a long coat and hat standing on the platform. One particularly chilling account came from a young woman named Clara, who boarded the 9:45 train late one night. She sat in the last carriage, unaware of its reputation. As the train sped through the darkness, she noticed a woman sitting across from her, staring out the window. Clara tried to strike up a conversation, but the woman didn't respond. When the train reached its next stop, Clara looked away for a moment, and when she turned back, the woman was gone. The only thing left behind was a faint imprint on the seat, as though someone had been sitting there moments before. To this day, no one knows why the ghost passenger lingers at the Eldermore station. Some believe she is searching for something, or someone, she lost long ago. Others think she is a warning, a reminder of the dangers that lurk in the shadows. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. The ghost passenger has become a permanent part of Eldermore's history. Her story is told and retold, a chilling reminder that some journeys never truly end. So if you ever find yourself at the Eldermore station on a foggy night, waiting for the 9:45 train, keep an eye on the last carriage. You might just catch a glimpse of the ghost passenger who never left. It was a cold, misty evening when the train pulled into the station. The platform was eerily quiet, save for the occasional whistle of the wind that carried with it a strange, almost mournful sound. The train itself was an old, rusted beast, its once pristine paint now chipped and faded. The nameplate on the side read Nocturne Express, though the letters were barely legible. Few dared to board this train, for it was said to be cursed. The legend of the Nocturne Express had been whispered for decades. It was said that the train appeared only on nights when the moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and those who boarded it were never seen again. Some claimed it was a portal to another world, while others believed it was a punishment for those with dark secrets. But for Jonas, a man desperate to escape his past, the stories were nothing more than superstitions. Jonas stood on the platform, his breath visible in the frigid air. He clutched a small suitcase, its contents hastily packed. His hands trembled, though whether from the cold or fear, he couldn't tell. He had no choice but to board the train. The authorities were closing in, and staying in the city was no longer an option. As the train doors creaked open, a wave of unease washed over him. The interior was dimly lit, the flickering lights casting long, distorted shadows. The air inside was heavy, carrying a faint metallic scent that made his stomach churn. He hesitated for a moment, but the sound of distant sirens spurred him forward. The carriage was nearly empty, save for a few passengers who sat silently, their faces obscured by the shadows. Jonas chose a seat near the window, hoping to avoid any interaction. As the train began to move, he glanced outside, watching the city lights fade into the darkness. For the first hour, the ride was uneventful. The rhythmic clatter of the train on the tracks was almost soothing, and Jonas allowed himself to relax. But as the train entered a dense forest, the atmosphere shifted. The temperature dropped, and the windows began to frost over. The lights flickered more frequently, and the metallic scent grew stronger. Jonas noticed something strange about the other passengers. They sat unnaturally still, their heads bowed as if in prayer. One by one, they began to hum a low, haunting melody. The sound sent shivers down his spine. He tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the frost-covered window. But when he glanced back at the passengers, he froze. Their faces were no longer obscured by shadows. Instead, they were pale and gaunt, their eyes hollow and lifeless. Their mouths moved in unison, chanting words in a language Jonas didn't recognize. Panic set in, and he clutched his suitcase tightly, his knuckles turning white. "Excuse me," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on?" The nearest passenger turned to him, their movements slow and deliberate. Their eyes locked onto his, and Jonas felt a chill run down his spine. "You shouldn't have boarded this train," the passenger said, their voice echoing unnaturally. Jonas's heart raced. He stood up, intending to move to another carriage, but the train suddenly lurched, throwing him off balance. The lights went out completely, plunging the carriage into darkness. The chanting grew louder, filling his ears and drowning out his thoughts. When the lights flickered back on, the passengers were gone. The seats were empty, and the carriage was eerily silent. Jonas's suitcase lay on the floor, its contents spilled out. Among the scattered items was a photograph of his family, a painful reminder of the life he had left behind. He picked up the photo, his hands trembling. As he stared at it, he noticed something strange. The faces of his wife and daughter were blurred. as if the photograph had been tampered with. A sense of dread washed over him, and he quickly stuffed the photo back into his suitcase. The train continued to speed through the forest, the trees outside appearing as dark, twisted silhouettes. Jonas made his way to the next carriage, hoping to find someone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. But each carriage he entered was empty, the seats covered in a thin layer of dust. Finally, he reached the last carriage. Unlike the others, this one was brightly lit, and a single figure sat at the far end. It was an old man, dressed in a tattered conductor's uniform. His face was weathered, and his eyes held a strange, otherworldly glow. "Welcome, Jonas," the man said, his voice calm and measured. Jonas froze. "How do you know my name?" The conductor smiled, though there was no warmth in it. "I know many things about you. I know why you're running. I know what you've done." Jonas's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, though his voice betrayed his fear. The conductor stood, his movements slow and deliberate. "This train is not like others," he said. "It seeks out those who carry the weight of guilt, those who cannot escape their past." Jonas took a step back, his mind racing. "I didn't mean to." "Save your excuses," the conductor interrupted. "The Nocturne Express does not judge, it merely delivers." "Delivers what?" Jonas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The conductor's smile widened. "Justice." Before Jonas could respond, the train screeched to a halt. The doors opened, revealing a desolate landscape bathed in an eerie red light. The air was thick with the stench of sulfur, and the ground was cracked and barren. "This is your stop," the conductor said, gesturing toward the open door. Jonas shook his head, his body trembling. "I'm not getting off this train." The conductor's expression darkened. "You don't have a choice." As if on cue, an invisible force pulled Jonas toward the door. He clawed at the walls, desperate to stay on the train, but it was no use. The force dragged him out, and he fell to the ground with a thud. The train doors closed, and the Nocturne Express disappeared into the darkness, leaving Jonas alone in the desolate wasteland. He screamed, but there was no one to hear him. The legend of the Nocturne Express continued to spread, a cautionary tale for those who thought they could outrun their sins. And though the train was rarely seen, its whistle could sometimes be heard on misty nights, a haunting reminder of the price of guilt.